the last 70 years. The relationship between these two kinds of law is intricate and multifaceted. On the one hand, rights of nature is the next logical step in a process of increasing inclusivity in law, of which human rights was such a milestone. On the other hand, rights of nature can also be viewed as an acknowledged underpinning of human rights, which provides for the lives of humans by protecting the natural systems which sustain human life. To explore the connections, both conceptual and practical, between these two movements, as well as the lessons that can be learned from the successes and challenges that each one has met, the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature will be hosting this third listening circle, in which experts from each movement will pull from their experience in order to open a discussion between the human rights and the rights of nature movement, their connections, contrasts, and applications. For that, we have today Diana Murcia from Universidad del Bosque, Colombia, Pablo Fajardo from UDAP, Unidad de Afectados por Texaco. Unfortunately, we just heard that Kumi Naido from Africa, from Amnesty International, cannot come today because unfortunately he has lost a very close friend and is attending a funeral. And we're really sorry for that and send Kumi all our support. We'll be listening from Shannon Bix from Movement Rights and the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, from Addison Luck from Air Law Center, from Nathaly Yépez, sorry, from CEDU. And yes, we have also invited some other allies to engage in this discussion. So I'm very happy to be here with you guys today. For those of you who need interpretation, you can choose the interpretation button and choose Spanish. Juan will be so kindly translating for us. Do talk very slowly so he can translate for us. And the idea is that each one of you can have 7 minutes to state your ideas, and then we can engage on a dialogue. We will start with Diana Murcia. Diana, I'm really happy to have you here today. Bienvenida, and you can start.
Vale, muchísimas gracias por la invitación a estos diálogos. Los he seguido con mucho interés y creo que hay muchas ideas, mucha diversidad y felicito, digamos, esta iniciativa. Bueno, yo quisiera fijar, digamos, un poco el desarrollo de los derechos de la naturaleza en el contexto del derecho internacional de los derechos humanos desde una perspectiva un poco como
nature within the context of international human rights, from a historical perspective, if you will. I have one first question, and that's why are the rights of nature necessary? And I think there's an answer for that at the local level, that there have been local recognitions of the rights of nature. When we look at the local level, in the case of Ecuador, it was a very crucial moment. There was being an intervention from civil society for the first time ever, and there was a criminalization of the defenders of nature. And so there's a constitutional beginning that we can't argue that it's within the Ecuadorian constitution. Nature has the same rights as human, and this breaks with a historical trend where the state used to assume that it had rights to land use. The state always had that representation, and so one of the things that the new Ecuadorian constitution breaks with is this idea of representativity on behalf of the state. But for example, the Wanganui River in New Zealand had a different purpose, and that was looking more for reparations of that, the biocultural division between the river and the Maori people. They were arguing for access to the river, and so when you read about the New Zealand case in the Wanganui River, one of the most important things to look at there is that when the Crown says, I recognize without reservations that I affected the river by severing its relationship from the Maori, and the Maori were likewise affected by their severment from the river. So if we go to the case of Bolivia, on the other hand, there was an international agenda based on the idea of nature that was never concreted into a national policy. It was just a declaration. So every country that's recognized the rights of nature in some way has had a very different significance, a very particular significance. And at the bottom, all these very diverse experiences that have different communities in the unit.
Cuando los jueces han determinado que un ecosistema es un sujeto de derechos. Entonces, yo creo que hay que mirar in situ, ¿no? En el lugar, como nos decía Arturo Escobar en un escrito hace varios años, hay que mirar en el lugar ese reconocimiento. En el fondo, ¿qué hay? Pues en el fondo, de todas maneras, sí se comparte un elemento común y es que hay una degradación ambiental y es que fundamentalmente la naturaleza no ha tenido un foro donde pueda ser protegida, o sea, no ha tenido un foro autónomo donde la gente pueda hacer valer sus derechos, ¿no? Y eso ocurre porque el derecho al medio ambiente falló. Y falló porque el derecho al medio ambiente, que es el que tendría que responder, digamos, por la... Pues es absolutamente antropocéntrico. Los instrumentos internacionales siempre han establecido que la vida, digamos, y el objetivo más importante son los seres humanos, pero también porque fundamentalmente el derecho ambiental es un derecho dosificador. ¿Dosificador de qué? De la contaminación. O sea, fundamentalmente lo que hace es establecer, en virtud, digamos, del principio de la protección de las generaciones futuras, fundamentalmente que las generaciones futuras puedan seguir contaminando el planeta tal y como nosotros lo hacemos, para que podamos seguir gozando el planeta tal y como nosotros lo hacemos, ¿no? Pero esa perspectiva dosificadora, pues, es desigual y sin duda alguna, donde la afectación...
Called sacrifice zones are areas where and the form of environmental law that we have is administrative right. That is to say, the administration of a sovereign that has the right over the land, and this has obviously failed to defend nature, and that's where the rights of nature come in. There's different expressions in different ways, but what is happening right now with the human doubts at one point about whether
cuando nombran al relator especial de Naciones Unidas sobre medio ambiente, uno de los primeros escritos o informes que él hace conceptuales sobre el tema es preguntarse si definitivamente existen derechos humanos ambientales autónomos o no. Y entonces trae, digamos, una serie, digamos, de elementos que menciona en ese informe, que es maravilloso, en los cuales establece las dos posturas, los que dicen, ¿para qué un derecho autónomo, derechos humanos ambientales autónomos si ya tenemos el derecho a la vida? Y finalmente, fundamentalmente, si uno protege el medio ambiente, uno está protegiendo un nivel de vida aceptable, ¿no? ¿O para qué tenemos que proteger el medio ambiente autónomamente si ya tenemos derecho a la alimentación? Y no se podría dar la alimentación si no está en un contexto, digamos, adecuado, ¿no? Entonces, se da esta pregunta, pero aún así, que se da hacia el año 2012, es decir, desde hace 10 años, prácticamente menos de 10 años, menos de una década que se da esta discusión, y hoy en día contamos con 3 instrumentos que son muy importantes. El primero de ellos es la opinión consultiva 23 de la Corte Interamericana, que sí establece, que dice, si hay un derecho humano al medio ambiente, o sea, sí los hay, y estos están en la propia Convención Americana. Y además eso implica la obligación de los estados de proteger los componentes del medio ambiente, es decir, si establece un nivel de protección de la naturaleza de forma directa y de forma autónoma respecto a los derechos, digamos, de las personas, ¿no? Existen los principios sobre derechos humanos y medio ambiente establecidos precisamente por el relator de Naciones Unidas sobre medio ambiente y derechos humanos, que a mí me sorprende mucho que la sociedad civil se haya apropiado tampoco de este instrumento. Es decir, ha habido mucho más interés en instrumentos como escaso, que en mi opinión son regresivos, pero ha habido menos atención y para mí los principios son realmente un instrumento súper valioso. Y en tercer lugar tenemos ya el desarrollo de una jurisprudencia, por ejemplo el caso Portillo, que es un caso de Comité de Derechos Humanos contra Paraguay, donde se condena al Estado paraguayo por las aspersiones que se realizan con elementos químicos sobre cultivos de soya, y entonces se establece la responsabilidad del Estado paraguayo en derechos humanos, en derecho a la vida y a la integridad y a la vida familiar por esta tarea. Ahora, concluyo porque ya se me acabaron mis minutos diciendo lo siguiente, y es que el desarrollo, o sea, el mundo de los derechos humanos y los de los derechos ambientales siempre ha ido en paralelo y a veces, muchas veces han ido en sentidos contrarios. En este momento se ha juntado, yo no me cabe la menor duda que los derechos de la naturaleza han impulsado que se empiece a hablar de los temas ambientales dentro del core, digamos, de los instrumentos en derechos humanos. Eso es algo muy importante. Y creo que a donde hay que ir es precisamente a seguir manteniendo el link, digamos, la relación. Porque si hacemos autónomos los derechos de la naturaleza de los derechos humanos, pues vamos a ser regresivos respecto de lo que ya logramos alcanzar, que nos ha costado tantísimo. Entonces, muchísimas gracias. Eso era lo que quería decir, Natalia, y a todos ustedes. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Diana. I think that we are on the phase of a very interesting discussion with the human rights and with the rights of nature, because people already take rights of human beings for granted, but many of those rights have not been developed and are not being guaranteed at this point. So when many people talk to us and ask us in Ecuador, what is happening with the rights of nature, this is not working because they're not fully implemented. Well, lawyers tell me to be patient because this takes time. Sometimes us as activists want to do it all faster and want those rights to be guaranteed faster. And that is what we need, because we urgently need a change. But we understand that this is a process, and that is what we want to hear and listen about these two connections. So we're gonna continue with Addison. Addison, thank you for being with us. If you have your 7 minutes to also explore these connections about the two movements. Go ahead, Addison.
Awesome. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Nati, for organizing this listening circle and for inviting me. It's a real honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. I have a short presentation. Can you guys see this? Okay, great. So hi, everyone. My name is Addison Luck. I'm an Earth Law Manager for the Earth Law Center. And this previous year, I have been on the Hawaiian island of Kauai, working with the Earth Law Center, community members, and local legislators to recognize nature's rights at a local and state level. And this is an ongoing campaign that we're still working on. And on a more personal level, I also run an educational Rights of Nature Instagram account. And some of the graphics that are on this presentation come from that account. So with my presentation today, I actually wanted to focus on a few areas that I'm particularly interested in, where human rights and nature's rights intersect, and where I think those intersections show particular promise for strengthening nature's rights and human rights in the future. So the first area is the comparison of the human right to a healthy environment to the rights of nature. So the human right to a healthy environment are anthropocentric rights, so human-centered rights that also benefit nature. And these include human rights such as the right to life, health, food, clean water, sanitation, and many others. And these rights are actually recognized at a constitutional level in more than 110 countries. And there are some notable exceptions, like the United States and United Kingdom don't recognize the human right to a healthy environment at a constitutional level. And although the human right to a healthy environment is really promising for strengthening the well-being of nature as well as the well-being of humans, it often goes unenforced, and there's usually no accountable agency at the national level that's tasked with tracking violations to these rights. And so then on the other side of the spectrum, we have the rights of nature, which are ecocentric rights that also benefit humans. And so for one example, we could look to a river's rights to native biodiversity, a right to flow, right to regenerate, and many others. And it's important to note that nature's rights can be recognized for a specific environmental feature like a river or a mountain, or for an entire ecosystem, or for all of nature itself. And the rights of nature are actually only recognized, as Nati said earlier, at a constitutional level in one country, which is Ecuador. And I just wanted to show this crazy dichotomy in the number of countries that recognize a human right to a healthy environment, which is 110 or more than 110, compared to the number of countries that recognize the rights of nature, which is only one. And I think that this crazy imbalance is kind of indicative that most of our governments and societies don't necessarily consider nature's rights to be a precursor or a necessary foundation for achieving human rights, but rather that most governments consider them to be separate issues, which I think is a bit outrageous if you really think about it. And one small thought example is you can look towards the human right to clean drinking water, as in a river's rights or a lake's rights or an aquifer's rights. I do think, however, that there are certain economic and governance models that are now coming out that consider the well-being of nature to be a sort of foundation for the well-being of humans. And so on this slide, I've just put together a few little graphs. They were actually inspired by naturesrights.org. And at the top here, you can see that this is sort of like the conventional rights-based frameworks that most governments and nations follow. And on one hand, you have humans and human rights, and then on the other hand, you have economy and corporate rights. And so these are basically the two main players that have rights in most societies. And it's important to mention that even in these societies, there are most often environmental laws, but that these environmental laws aren't necessarily rights-based laws. And then on the bottom of the slide, you can see the sort of conventional policy frameworks that most governments and businesses and corporations and societies follow. And this is sort of the standard ESG framework that has nature, humans, and economy, businesses and companies and governments are following. And it's also important to mention that the nature on the top of this circle doesn't necessarily recognize the rights of nature, but rather the well-being of nature. And then over here on the right is the sort of ideal framework that I think governments and businesses and nations could follow in the future, adopting an ecocentric framework. So this could be used for both rights-based and policy frameworks. So at the top, you can see that nature or nature's rights or the well-being of nature would be a necessary foundation for then achieving human rights and the well-being of humans, which is then a necessary foundation for a strong economy. Okay, so the second and I guess the last thing that I was going to talk about today is the campaign to make ecocide an international crime at the International Criminal Court. And many of you have probably seen in the news recently that a group of lawyers from around the world came together to formally define ecocide, and that definition is here on the left, but basically ecocide, if you don't know, is extreme harm to nature at a long-term or widespread scale, most often at the international level. And prosecuting ecocide could help address harmful environmental damage at the international level, and this includes things like oil spills, plastic pollution, mining, greenhouse gas emissions, factory farming, the list goes on and on. And the International Criminal Court, the ICC in The Hague, Netherlands, is now considering adopting ecocide as the 5th crime that it prosecutes. And the other 4 crimes that the ICC prosecutes are all focused on human rights abuses. So these are war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and the crime of aggression. And so if ecocide was adopted, it would be the first international crime that aims to protect nature from an ecocentric perspective. And it also would be the first international crime that the ICC has adopted since the 1940s in the Nuremberg trials. And if ecocide was prosecuted at the international level, it would have, I think, immediate benefits for nature's rights or the well-being of nature at least, and also for human rights. And so for one sort of example of how it could help, if there was a large fossil fuel company that had a massive oil spill in international waters and there's no sort of country jurisdiction in that area, the ICC could prosecute that fossil fuel company on the grounds of ecocide, which would in turn help strengthen the well-being of nature and also help strengthen human rights. So I thought that ecocide and also the human right to a healthy environment and nature's rights, that sort of comparison, are particularly interesting and promising areas where there is an intersection between human rights and the rights of nature, and how they both really do strengthen one another, but how overall the rights of nature, I think, is sort of a necessary foundation for achieving strong human rights, especially the human right to a healthy environment. And on this last slide, I just have this is the name of the Instagram account that I mentioned earlier on. And so if you like the graphics in this presentation or anything, you're welcome to go to that Instagram account, and there's more content on there. But that's all I have. And thank you, Nati, very much for inviting me. And I'm looking forward to hearing everyone else's presentations.
Thank you, Addison. Great to hear from you. And thank you for sharing this. I'm really glad that we are coordinating actions and that we are working together to map all the initiatives that are happening around the world. And I want to mention that one of the lawyers who actually created the definition for ecocide is here today, is Pablo Fajardo. So just wanted to congratulate Pablo for that great work and the publishing of that work that came out recently. So congratulations, Pablo.
Gracias, Nathaly. Gracias también por la invitación a este evento. Gracias a todos los que están siguiéndonos en Zoom, en Facebook, o también los que escucharán después. Bueno, este es un tema, el tema naturaleza, un tema súper interesante. Interesante, yo digo, de varios puntos de vista. Uno siempre se pone como referencia el caso ecuatoriano del marco constitucional, pero siempre yo lo pongo también en contexto de esa divergencia o esa contradicción entre lo que establece la norma constitucional y lo que pasa en la realidad, lo que pasa en la práctica. Y les voy a contar brevemente un caso concreto que tenemos aquí en la Amazonas Norte de Ecuador. Desde hace más de 50 años, las empresas petroleras, sean públicas o privadas, realizan la combustión del gas en los mecheros de una forma inadecuada, antitécnica, contaminante, y además que emite una enorme cantidad de gases de efecto invernadero y que por ende afectan los derechos de la propia naturaleza. Uno se puede imaginar, bueno, esto quizás ocurría antes porque las normas que teníamos no eran tan estrictas, pero no es así. En el 2008 entra en vigencia la nueva Constitución de la República del Ecuador y uno se esperaba que haya una adaptación adecuada de las normas secundarias al marco constitucional y también que haya una aplicación progresiva de ese marco constitucional a lo que pasa en la realidad. Pero resulta que no pasa nada de eso. El Estado ecuatoriano, el Estado ecuatoriano, cada año renova las autorizaciones a las distintas empresas petroleras operadoras en Ecuador para que realicen la combustión del gas, a sabiendas que esa combustión del gas contamina el ambiente, genera gases de efecto invernadero y por ende afecta los derechos de la propia naturaleza. El Estado sabe eso, tiene toda la información. Sin embargo, cada año emite esas autorizaciones. Ante esa realidad y los distintos casos, por ejemplo, de cáncer que tenemos en la zona, un grupo de 9 niñas entre 8 y 15 años plantearon una acción constitucional en contra del Estado ecuatoriano para exigirle al Estado que no emita más autorizaciones, que obligue a las empresas petroleras operadoras a aplicar los correctivos necesarios para evitar que siga quemándose ese gas y por ende violentando los derechos de la propia naturaleza. La defensa del Estado, realmente desastrosa, pero toda la defensa del Estado la basa en acusarnos que con esa medida o esa acción estamos afectando la economía del país, lo cual no es verdad. Segundo, que no hay información real, verídica, que eso afecte a la naturaleza. Y tercero, que no hay otra forma de hacer. Es decir, no importa la gente, no importa la naturaleza. Se basaba principalmente en el hecho que esto afecta a la economía del país. Es el aspecto económico, el interés económico sobre los derechos humanos y de la naturaleza. Finalmente, luego de una gran batalla, logramos que las niñas ganen esta batalla. Las niñas ganaron esta batalla del Estado. Y la Corte de Justicia de Sucumbío reconoció que el Estado ecuatoriano vulnera 3 derechos con esa. Primero, derecho a la salud. Segundo, derecho a un ambiente sano y ecológicamente equilibrado. Y tercero, que el Estado viola los derechos de la propia naturaleza al tener estos mecheros o permitir eso. Una gran victoria, un gran triunfo de 9 niñas contra el Estado ecuatoriano. Esa sentencia se produjo en enero de este año 2021. Los jueces tienen normalmente 48 horas para hacer pública la sentencia por escrito. Ya han pasado 5 meses, bueno, más de 5 meses, y hasta este día no tenemos la sentencia por escrito. ¿Y por qué no tenemos? Aquí nos suponemos toda la presión que ejercen las petroleras y el Estado ecuatoriano para que los jueces no emitan la sentencia, porque obviamente los plazos para empezar a pagar los mecheros corren a partir de que se publica la sentencia. Entonces, ahí tenemos una gran contradicción. Uno es lo que dice la norma, la letra, y otro es lo que pasa en la práctica. En la práctica, el Estado ecuatoriano sigue teniendo enormes deudas con la naturaleza y con la población. Noten ustedes, por ejemplo, que si el Estado ecuatoriano llegase a apagar los mecheros, solamente apagando los mecheros donde se queman el gas de la industria petrolera, estaría cumpliendo con el 24% de sus compromisos en base al Acuerdo de París. Es decir, una cuarta parte de las emisiones, que son bajas comparadas con otros países, pero cumple una cuarta parte solamente apagando los mecheros. Pero no hay la voluntad política para hacerlo. El interés económico se impone al derecho humano y de la naturaleza. En consecuencia, tenemos un gran problema aquí, que es lo que pasa en la realidad versus lo que dice la letra, en este caso constitucional. En consecuencia, sí nos toca hacer un trabajo mayor de primero llegar mucho más a la base, a la población, a fin de que logremos que la población se empodere de estos derechos y luchemos juntos para lograr una práctica, una aplicación y una tutela efectiva. Y segundo, también forzar al Estado ecuatoriano a actuar en la realidad. O sea, cada vez es más evidente la captura corporativa y gubernamental hacia el sistema judicial. Y eso no permite que los jueces actúen también con libertad y dejan a la población y a la naturaleza en completa indefensión. Hasta ahí nomás, compañero. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Pablo. Thank you so much, Pablo, for your intervention. We thought it was very important to have you on today to talk about this gas flaring case. And indeed, it is quite an important case because it combines rights of nature and human rights. And it's an important case because the court ended up giving having a positive narrative in favor of nature and not in favor of the corporate and economic interests that are normally the ones that prime. So I am really happy that you were able to share this case with us today. And thank you so much, and congratulations for that winning. I hope that we also have with you some other cases on gas flaring and the effects of gas flaring on climate change and the violation of the rights of nature. So let's also see how those cases keep on developing, because definitely having those gases on the Amazon is a huge crime against human beings and against nature. So thank you, Pablo, for sharing that with us. Next, we're gonna have with us Shannon Bix. She is the Director of Movement Rights, and she's also part of the Executive Committee of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. Shannon, if you can share with us for 7 minutes also your impressions about these two movements. Go ahead, Shannon.
Thank you, Natty, and thank you to all everyone who's on the panel. And good morning from California, where it's still a little early. So I think one of the things that is important to note is that these two, ideas, rights, human rights and rights of nature, they're not separate. This isn't an argument about whether or not, really what is at question. If we're looking at what the Universal Declaration on Human Rights says, it's affirming the equal and inalienable rights of the human family as the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace. And that's certainly an important piece to recognize. I think what the rights of nature movement is trying to express is that we cannot separate the human family from the rest of the Earth community. When we set human rights, when we take them out of context of the system of life that sustains us, that's when we begin to get in trouble. I mean, when we talk about, and it's not just separating humans from the rest of the living system, but in many laws, it's about dominion or putting humans above the rest of the system of life. And I think when you think about climate change, what is climate change except for the idea that humans have exceeded the laws of the natural world? Because we are governed, as much as we might talk about human laws and our own behavior, we have to really shift our thinking, not just in law, but in culture, about the relationship, as Addison was saying, about the what is the role of human law with respect to putting humans in context of the system of life, of Earth that we live in. Human communities are part of the natural communities. And if we do have, as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, if we do have inalienable rights, where do those inalienable rights come from? And there are lots of ideas about that, whether it's from God or from the system of life itself. And I think that we have to start thinking about, what does it mean when we talk about rights? What are rights exactly? When we talk about laws, rights is the difference between a rights holder as somebody with legal standing in a court of law and property. And throughout our history, we've also shifted many of our ideas about what is property and what is a rights-bearing entity. And slaves were once considered property. Women were once considered property. And this notion of ecosystems that sustain our lives as property really is the story of separation. It's really the story of colonization at work. And we have to put into context our own human existence and our own rights as humans as part of this larger ecosystem. We cannot separate ourselves from the ecosystem that sustains us. What we do is in connection with the system of life, everything we do. And this idea that nature currently in law almost everywhere is seen as property, human property, to be owned, to be dominated for profit. And we have to begin to reconcile not just how we understand ourselves and as holders of rights, of human rights, but to put that in the context of the larger system of life. We are part of that system of life. And if we are rights holders, certainly the ecosystems that sustain us are rights holders. And I think that a lot of people also think about human rights as something that is very individualistic. I have human rights. Natty has human rights. Pablo Fajardo has human rights. And we don't think about the rights of a tree, a rock, as an individual rights holder. That's not really what rights of nature is suggesting. Rights of nature is suggesting that we as human species are part of a natural community, part of an ecosystem, part of a watershed that needs to be in balance in order for us to survive, in order for us to thrive. So we as rights holders of human rights also have to recognize that rights and responsibilities are two sides of the same coin. So for us to enjoy rights, human rights, we must recognize our responsibilities to the ecosystems that maintain our our lives and sustain us as humans. And I think the other last piece that I'll put in here is that there are leaders globally and in particular indigenous cultures that live within the system of life and protect that system of life. It's no coincidence that indigenous rights, where those of the world's biodiversity is protected. So there is, there is a way for us to look at human rights and rights of nature not as separate, but actually as one as part of the other, and that we are all connected through this circle of life. So I think, again, it's not about, this is about the story of separation. This is the story of colonization. It's sort of gone awry. When we consider human rights and we take it out of context of the ecosystems, that's where human rights begin to look more like domination over nature rather than mutual cooperation. And I think that's what rights of nature, both in law and both in shifting law and shifting culture, has the power to be able to sort of heal and bring together these two ideas. Thank you, Natty.
Thank you, Shannon. That was beautiful, and that was very explicit of how these topics are completely interrelated. So thank you so much for that participation. And next, we're going to listen from Nathaly Yépez. Nathaly works at CEDU, and I'm really happy to see Elsie here with us today, because after we're done with Nathaly's presentation, we'll all engage in a dialogue about these two issues. So Nathaly, we're with you. You were trying to share your screen? There you go. Go ahead, Nathaly. You're muted, by the way.
Hola, ¿lo pueden ver ahí? Bueno, gracias por esta invitación. Yo quisiera compartirles la experiencia que he tenido como asesora y abogada dentro de los casos que ha llevado la Comisión Ecuménica de Derechos Humanos. Y creo que un primer punto importante que ya lo señaló Diana es el hecho de que el reconocimiento de los derechos de la naturaleza también deben ser entendidos en su contexto. En el caso ecuatoriano llevamos un reconocimiento explícito, constitucional de los derechos de la naturaleza por 12 años. Y creo que el caso ecuatoriano permite mirar los retos de la aplicación de una forma muy diferente de mirar a la naturaleza. En el 2008 lo que sucede es que, sobre todo desde el movimiento indígena, se plantea el desafío de partir desde otra epistemología, desde otra forma de pensamiento, desde mirar a la naturaleza no solo como un bien de uso para el ser humano o desde esta perspectiva estética muchas veces que se le ha mirado a la naturaleza, sino como un verdadero sujeto con derechos. Y tenemos grandes conquistas a nivel normativo. Nuestra Constitución, nuestro preámbulo, reconoce que somos parte de un ecosistema, muy cerca a la idea que nos planteaba Shannon. Nos plantea en su artículo 10, por ejemplo, que es titular de derechos. Y a lo largo de 4 artículos de la Constitución se reconocen 3 derechos esenciales de la naturaleza. El respeto a su existencia, y a nivel jurídico nosotros en el Ecuador tenemos el famoso principio de precaución. Se reconoce, por ejemplo, que tiene derecho a ser reparada en casos de graves violaciones a su existencia y sobre todo que no se extingan especies endémicas. Pero claro, como ya lo anticipaba también Pablo, el momento de que los abogados ecuatorianos empezamos a litigar los derechos de la naturaleza resulta incomprensible este reconocimiento. Creo que yo podría resaltar 2 casos ecuatorianos exitosos en materia de derechos. Uno, el que nos hablaba Pablo recientemente, y otro del año 2010, cuando se reconoció los derechos de un río en el sur del país. Y en ese sentido, yo creo que hay un divorcio entre lo que sucedió a nivel normativo, ¿sí?, y la voluntad política y las comprensión constitucional. Incluso se emitió lo que nosotros en el Ecuador conocemos un mandato minero, es decir, la Asamblea Constituyente de esa época decidió suspender y prohibir concesiones mineras en zonas frágiles, en fuentes de agua, en zonas en donde no existió consulta a pueblos y nacionalidades indígenas, pero años más adelante, en cambio, se emitieron leyes infraconstitucionales o leyes secundarias que, por el contrario, facilitaban la entrada de empresas extractivistas. Y en ese sentido, yo quisiera hablar rápidamente de 2 casos que tienen que ver precisamente con la expansión de esas fronteras extractivistas. El uno el caso del proyecto minero en Ecuador, ustedes pueden ver en el mapa, es el proyecto de hecho que está en pleno funcionamiento, en fase de explotación ahora en el año 2021. Está ubicado al sur de nuestro país. Como pueden ver las imágenes, esta imagen es antes del año 2018 en la cordillera del Cóndor, una de las zonas más biodiversas del Ecuador y también de la zona andina, en donde incluso recién en el año 2009 se descubrió una nueva especie de rana. Y no es sorpresa que sean los pueblos campesinos e indígenas los que defiendan, tanto desde sus derechos humanos como desde la naturaleza, la posibilidad de que no se extingan los ecosistemas ni las especies. A pesar de que existió varias luchas legales, no fue posible parar más que por 2 años el proyecto minero. Sin embargo, ahora se encuentra en fase de explotación. Podemos ver en estas imágenes que me he permitido sacar de algunas organizaciones cómo se encuentra actualmente la zona del Cóndor Mirador, esta zona frágil de fuente de agua para nuestro país. Miren ustedes en el año 2009 cómo se encontraba la zona del Cóndor Mirador y cómo ahora ha avanzado gracias al proyecto minero el proceso de deforestación. Esta es una foto satelital del 2017, ahora está mucho más avanzado. Y en cambio, otro caso que también fue interesante en donde litigamos los del Ecuador, en donde se implementó un proyecto hidroeléctrico de capitales privados que, como ustedes ven en su parte superior derecha, ocasionó que se desvíe el río. ¿Cuál fue la afectación concreta? Además de desviar el cauce natural del río, que la construcción, al haberse apegado al pueblo en el año 2015, ocasionó que se inunde y se afecte la población. ¿Qué nos hizo pensar estos dos casos? Nos hace pensar, en ambos casos presentamos acciones de protección a favor de los derechos humanos y a favor de los derechos de la naturaleza. En ambos casos, los jueces negaron la aplicación. Disculpe la interrupción. Entonces, nosotros tuvimos la posibilidad de litigar, pero los jueces no comprendían cómo proteger estos derechos. En el caso de Cóndor Mirador, de la gran minería a gran escala que se encuentra, si bien se podía analizar el peligro a la extinción de especies, no había prueba suficiente. Y en el caso de San Pablo de Amalí, el juez no llegaba a comprender y lo que dijo, esto es un tema de derecho ambiental, de inconformidad con las licencias. En el caso de explotación minera, incluso llegamos a presentar una petición a la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos que se encuentra en trámite. ¿Por qué lo hicimos? Y con esto yo voy concluyendo. Creo que los derechos de la naturaleza y los derechos humanos tienen más coincidencias que cosas que los diferencien o los separen. ¿Cuáles son esas coincidencias? Desde CEDU creemos que ambos titulares, seres humanos y naturaleza, coexistimos en territorios. Y se hace visible esta coexistencia en territorios de vida, llamaríamos nosotros. En territorios generalmente frágiles en sus ecosistemas, en territorios que son de alta biodiversidad y que coinciden con la posesión de pueblos y nacionalidades indígenas que desde su cosmovisión, en el caso ecuatoriano llamado Suma Causay, lo han comprendido. Nosotros, quienes estamos en el lado urbano y occidental, no llegamos a entender cómo la naturaleza puede ser un ser, a pesar de que no habla, de que no se defiende, pero que existe. Lo segundo es que los dos titulares estamos bajo presiones económicas de grandes capitales que van a hacer que choquen los intereses entre la vida y entre los capitales y por supuesto la necesidad de tener recursos económicos para solventar las necesidades de las grandes ciudades. En tercer lugar, que tanto los abusos normativos, físicos, los abusos de poder afectan a la naturaleza como al ser humano. Y lo último que me parece interesante y clave que trajo la Constitución ecuatoriana es que ambos titulares ambientales se podía ver cómo jueces razonaban reduciendo la reparación a reparación económica a poblaciones. cuando la Constitución ecuatoriana reconoce el derecho de reparación, eleva el estándar de protección y no solo nos conformaríamos o bastaría con una reparación económica. La naturaleza no se restaura de esa forma, sino tendrían que generarse verdaderos planes de restauración ecosistémica. Creo que con estas reflexiones vemos los retos que sin duda nos deja el reconocimiento que pueden dar otros países, pero que implica un cambio más allá de lo jurídico, un cambio.
Thank you, Nathalie, for that presentation. And I think that you with Elsie and Sedu and the rest of the lawyers develop a really amazing job with pretty much the combination of human rights and rights of nature and the litigation of these two rights in a country like Ecuador that recognizes it in its constitution. So thank you for bringing on those cases and showing how these cases are interrelated. So now we're done with the presentations, with the short presentations, and we want to open a space for dialogue, for conversation. I would like to ask you all to open your cameras and to just ask for either raise your hand or put your name on the chat and say, you know, like respond to any of the presentations that were provocative before. And let's have an open discussion, an open conversation about what's coming forward. How can we implement and guarantee the rights of nature and the human rights? How do these movements how are they interrelated? Many times when I talk about rights of nature, I get the question on why rights of nature? Why, if we are nature needs its own rights? And I think that that's a very interesting question, because I wish that at one point we will have a rights of nature being like the umbrella that covers us all, and that includes human rights. But the reason why we are talking about rights of nature is because we, like as human beings, have forgotten about nature, have considered it an object. And it was an urgent need to incorporate nature into the legal system, to stop treating it as an object, and start treating it as a subject of rights and as a person. So this dialogue is very important, because many people think, even indigenous people feel sometimes that collective rights might be threatened by rights of nature. So I want to open with these sort of like provocative questions, a discussion about these two topics and how do they relate? How do we continue in dialogue? How do we work to guarantee both the rights of nature and the human rights, and how do they interrelate? So who wants to jump first? Shannon?
Hi, Natty. Thank you to all the presenters. And I'm sorry we are having some translation issues, because I know that my Spanish is not great and I missed quite a bit of to continue this dialogue and to catch some of this information. I think one of the things that that just sparked with your provocative question, Natty, is you know, this one of the things that the United Nations in particular talks about, especially in the spaces where climate is concerned, is the financialization of nature, saying that we cannot protect nature unless we put a price tag on it, or ecosystem services, what nature does, excuse me, what nature does for humans, what is the value of that? And this is this is the sort of the clear definition of property, that we're only talking about those things outside ourselves as what is the value to us? What, you know, once that there is no value of a tree unless you chop it down and make lumber out of it, or, you know, build, you know, all of these things, that we have to stop thinking of ecosystems as something that are the word natural resources comes to mind. It's a word that is used so often by everyone, that these are really sources of life that we are talking about, putting a price tag on what nature does for us, that's its only value. And I think that is sort of the part of that extreme edge of human rights becoming a barrier to seeing the colonization, that split between ourselves and that dominion over nature, as opposed to the reality, which is, regardless of what our human laws say, there are natural laws, and we must abide by those natural laws. And the job of rights of nature, in a legal sense, is to put into perspective the relationship between us and everything else, not as owners of nature, but as part and parcel of it, and that there are limits to the earth there, and what we can do with the earth, and we have to put in balance. Human laws need to be in balance with the laws of the natural world. And I think that's what rights of nature is really attempting to do. It isn't about eliminating human rights. It's about putting some balance so that we have a future on this planet, that we can continue to live, and not just live, but thrive in a way that we're currently already not in balance. And climate change and drought and refugees of climate change, all of this are part and parcel of taking this idea of human rights and twisting it into something that's really about just the commodification of everything else outside of the human body.
Thank you, Shannon, for that. That was very, very interesting. Someone else who wants to join the dialogue? Elsie, we would love to hear from you since you were able to join. Elsie has been an amazing defender of human rights and now of rights of nature. So go ahead, Elsie.
I find this very, very interesting because and very important, because being conscious of the relationship between the rights of nature and human rights is something I would say kind of new to the majority of the people. Like you said before, they can't imagine how nature can be personified almost. So I think this make it available to more people to consider the cosmovision of the Indian culture, the Indian communities, of the Pachamama, the Mother Earth. To them, they understand the relationship. It's not something separate. It's all part of the same system. So I want to congratulate the initiative and the people who have participated that bring light to this subject.
Thank you, Elsie, for that. And actually, one of the something that we have done and have started doing here in Ecuador as EDENMA, that is my local organization, and that we're going to be translating and doing it with GARN to make it available for the rest of the world, is training the judges. So we have started a series of trainings for judges, because we, and I think that Natalie and Pablo will, and Elsie will resonate with this. And many times they're very frustrated because we take amazing cases like the one that Natalie was mentioning with Condor Mirador, where species, the impact studies showed that species were going to go extinct, And of course, if you wanted to protect the rights of nature, then something needed to be done, and the state didn't do anything about it. And a lot of that is because many of the judges, and Pablo, we have seen that with many of the cases where we have been together in court, they don't understand the rights of nature. And to understand that to resolve a case of rights of nature is not easy, because it needs the opinion of an expert opinion of a biologist, of an indigenous person, of a local person, of a lawyer. You know, it needs many voices to solve a case. And so we need to educate more. And that's the idea of these dialogues as well, to educate and to bring forward this the attention to the details of how are these rights intertwined, and they complement each other. So Nathaly, you want to go ahead?
Gracias, Nati. Solo quería agregar que en el caso ecuatoriano, los defensores de derechos humanos empezamos a autodefinirnos también como defensores de la naturaleza, porque nos parece innegable la relación entre ambos derechos, ambos titulares. Es muy difícil mirar casos en donde, existiendo graves afectaciones a la naturaleza, no estén comprometidos los derechos humanos. Esa es una primera idea. Y lo segundo es que creo que es complicado entenderlos. Y tiene que ver con lo que mencionaba Shannon, con cómo miramos los elementos de la naturaleza. Y un ejemplo muy claro es el agua. En todos los casos que hemos defendido, el agua es un elemento fundamental en la defensa de los derechos humanos y de la naturaleza. Y escucharles a los compañeros cómo el agua no es un recurso de uso o explotación, es un recurso de servicio de la naturaleza al ser humano. Y eso hace que tengamos un nivel diferente de exigibilidad de derechos, no solo de proteger la contaminación, sino también de proteger la existencia misma del agua. Creo que esa comprensión desde los estados, o al menos del estado ecuatoriano, que reconoció a la naturaleza como un sujeto pleno y sus elementos, aún nos falta muchísimo. Y eso se lo mira en los razonamientos de los jueces, que no saben cómo mirar la existencia de seres que no son humanos. Y creo que ese es precisamente el desafío, pero creo que entender la defensa del agua puede ayudarnos a entender la defensa de la naturaleza.
Gracias, Nathaly. Indeed, and we have had some other dialogues about the rights of nature and the rights of rivers with listening circles. I encourage you to listen to these. And we are going to have actually two more dialogues, one in relation to the rights of nature and the rights of oceans, and one to the rights of nature and the rights of water, because that's a very extensive topic. And there are a lot of complementarities and a lot of different strategies.
I feel like the other speakers have said this very eloquently, but I just want to reiterate that I think that the rights of nature's role is not to conflict with human rights, but is meant to strengthen human rights. And one thing that sort of popped in my mind when I was listening to everyone talk was the possibility, and I don't even know if this is a good idea or not, but I just wanted to throw it out there, but the possibility of combining rights of nature legislation with legislation that guarantees the human right to a healthy environment. Maybe that could sort of like satisfy some people's problems or reservations with the rights of nature impeding human rights, which I feel like all the speakers know it doesn't. But I just wanted to throw that out there as one potential idea, maybe for like future legislation that combines human rights and rights of nature in certain legislation. But yeah, I don't know if anyone has thoughts or experience with that, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, something that we have done, Addison, actually, we worked in this case together with Nathaly a long time ago, was to try to maneuver around the rights of nature and try to bring that case of Condor Mirador to the Inter-American Court of Justice, because that court doesn't recognize the rights of nature, but it recognizes human rights. So we try to make it fit. Is that the word, Nathaly? We try to make it fit this rights of nature case into a system that doesn't recognize the rights of nature. And we're actually, the court is already listening to this case. And it's interesting because we went through the channel of Buen Vivir, of well-being, and how like well-being needs a recognition and needs an understanding that we need to guarantee the rights of nature. So that is something that we did with that case. But I feel that that here we have like many experts. So like Pablo and Elsie and Nathaly, they're 3 experts that have litigated with these 2 cases. And actually in Ecuador, we have, going back to numbers, you were talking about how many countries recognize the rights of human beings. 37 countries have already recognized some sort of rights of nature, either in its constitution, in a law, in a local government, in an ordinance, or with a local ecosystems. So we already have 37 countries that have advanced with the rights of nature, which is quite a lot if you think about that we were the first ones to do it in Ecuador in 2008. And in Ecuador, we actually have an observatory that is called the Legal Observatory for the Rights of Nature in Ecuador. And we have 56 cases of rights of nature in Ecuador. So it is, many of them have been litigated both in together rights of nature with collective rights or with human rights. Some of them we have won those cases through collective rights. For example, the judge has recognized there hasn't been the right to prior consultation, so the case has been won through that and not for the rights of nature. But of course, nature gets benefited as well. But as we were saying, we need to keep on training judges so they can understand how are these concepts brought together and they're complementary, and that we cannot only say, as in the old paradigm, Addison, that you were so eloquently explaining before, that nature needs to be compensated, but it needs to be restored integrally, which is completely a new concept for judges. And if we cannot restore nature completely, then we cannot guarantee its rights. So that's quite important. So someone else wants to join the dialogue? Elsie, I think that you are muted. You might be muted. No, I think that you muted yourself right now, Elsie.
I'm muted now.
Ahora sí. Now we can hear you.
I will have to leave shortly, so that's why I'm muted.
Okay, thank you, Elsie. Nathaly?
Yo quería también plantear una pregunta en torno a lo que estamos señalando con respecto a, y ya lo mencionaba Diana al inicio de su intervención, parece que hay una especie de cruce o solape con el derecho ambiental, y eso ha sido una discusión acá, sobre todo con los juristas ecuatorianos. Entonces quisiera provocar una reflexión con respecto a si creen que el derecho ambiental fortalece el reconocimiento de la naturaleza como un titular de derechos o puede ser una herramienta de obstáculo muchas veces. Lo digo porque en nuestros casos, cuando no se ha reconocido a la naturaleza en sus derechos, ha sido precisamente porque se entiende que ya está protegido, cubierto el tema con el derecho ambiental. Entonces quería un poco provocar esa reflexión. Yo creo que sin duda fortalece. En el Ecuador creo que ha empujado para que exista una mayor protección para todos los titulares, pero quisiera escucharles.
Nathaly, we've had that a little bit of that conversation before, and some lawyers at the very beginning of the rights of nature in Ecuador were very hesitant to recognize the rights of nature, and still are, because they thought that the right to a healthy environment was enough. But I think that we keep on seeing, for example, with the case of Piatua, that is an interesting case in Ecuador, where all the environmental rights were guaranteed. They had an environmental license, everything was in order. However, the building of that hydroelectric plant was going to eliminate and was going to drive to the extinction of many species. And the court failed in favor of nature and against this case that had all the environmental permits. So I think that's a very interesting case of, how rights of nature is one step beyond the environmental rights. And I think that Pablo also wants to join this part of the conversation. Pablo?
No, gracias, Nathalie. Yo pienso que es perdón, que pongo la cámara. Pienso que es un tema súper interesante. Creo que tenemos algunos vacíos en algunos aspectos. Uno que ya se ha mencionado, digamos, es ese vacío de conocimiento que tenemos no solo en jueces, sino también en autoridades gubernamentales muchas veces. O sea, uno va ante el ambiente en Ecuador, por ejemplo, y muy pocos conocen el tema. La sociedad como tal, en gran parte, también desconocemos el tema profundamente. Pero también, por otra parte, hay un problema que es esa confusión, porque yo creo que el hilo que separa los derechos ambientales con la naturaleza es tan fino que a veces genera confusión y mucha gente tampoco logra separarlos como tal. O sea, van juntos, son paralelos, pero hay que reconocer que la propia naturaleza tiene derechos y a veces, como decía antes, creo que era Nathaly, se confunde y piensa que el derecho a un ambiente sano ya es también naturaleza, y no es así. Son dos derechos distintos y diferentes como tal, ¿no? Entonces creo que ese trabajo en que se reconozca el derecho a la naturaleza como tal, algo implícito, propio, intrínseco, es algo importante. Y es el paso que tenemos que seguir dando progresivamente al fin de que los operadores de justicia, los señores jueces y también autoridades de control lo reconozcan y lo apliquen plenamente. Creo que es el gran vacío que tenemos, ¿sí? Y por otra parte, las propias empresas. Y aquí también voy un poco más atrás, que es la academia. O sea, las universidades también tienen ese gran problema de que muchas veces están educando a sus estudiantes, pero creo yo, en una filosofía un poco confusa sobre estos aspectos, naturaleza y ambiente, como una sola cosa cuando les conviene y separados, muy separados, cuando también les conviene.
Yes, Pablo, I completely agree with what you are saying. I think that many of the judges and many of the companies interpret the law as for their convenience in many ways, but that is our role to bring up those cases and make them visible for the rest. I think we're about to wrap up. I want to know if someone else has some closing comments so we can start wrapping up. Shannon or anybody who wants to do like a closing comment. Addison?
I just want to say thank you for organizing this and for organizing all of the listening circles. They're great tools, and I look forward to the next one.
Great, thank you, Addison. And the listening is to start a conversation and to meet each other. I think that many times I really wanted, for example, Shannon to be like listening to Nathaly and Addison and Pablo and about the cases in Ecuador. So these are great opportunity to meet each other, to learn about the different cases that are happening, and to educate as well. That is why we have this closed discussion and dialogue, but we also put it online. What we are going to do with this listening circle, because we had some problems with the translation, is that we have the Facebook event, the Facebook to be broadcasted in Facebook, but we're also going to have the video recording in YouTube, and that's going to have subtitles so that everybody can listen to the whole dialogue. Because what we aim to do is to keep on educating about these rights, about how they are complementary, how we can work together, and how we can see real cases like the ones we have heard from Nathaly and Pablo, where these cases are already being combined, and how are judges failing in favor of nature, in favor of the people for these cases. We also want to invite you, and some of you are already involved, but in GARN, the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, has been developing many regional and thematic hubs. So we have hubs for Latin America, a hub for Europe, a hub for Africa. We have a legal hub that I think many of you will be interested. We have an academic hub, and we have a youth hub and an indigenous council. And they are all spaces where people that have similar interests are coming together to bring about the different cases of this rapidly growing movement of the rights of nature, and how are these cases being brought forward, and how we all need to learn about them, and how we can keep on promoting these cases. So I will send you the information to join the different hubs and to follow us in GARN, and to make sure that GARN is a network. What we want is to promote the rights of nature, and what we need is to be connected. So everything sums up. I'm really happy to congratulate again Pablo and the rest of the 12 lawyers who came up with that amazing definition of ecocide. And I think everything is like building this important movement that is happening and that we're all involved with. So I'm really happy to make those connections, and we'll keep on doing these listening circles to keep on bringing movements together and strengthening the alliances. So if we are done, if anybody has any comments, thank you, Rafa, for that applause. And thank you, everybody who has been listening to us on Facebook and YouTube. We're very sorry for the translation today that didn't work as planned. We sometimes have some technical problems, but this is the first with translation, so we're very sorry about that. And we'll keep communicating for the next time. So thank you very much for this dialogue. Very interesting. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Goodbye.
Gracias.
Bye.